All right. So we did a lot of partner program beginning foundational stuff in our puppy program with this guy. So he's kind of ahead of the curve. Week 1 is going to be a lot of just kind of discovery and foundational stuff, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. However, in this particular partner program, it is all puppy alumni, which is really cool. So we'll most likely actually get to do a lot more advanced stuff and not spend so much time on the fundamentals. So making sure that your implied stay system is in place and that you haven't fallen out of the habit of making sure you release your dog from all known commands. So making sure that we're releasing them with either the release word or your clicker. And that's going to be important. We do use the clicker in this program. It's going to really help us out for accelerating learning and getting really sharper obedience, but it's not necessary. So if you found that the clicker is kind of cumbersome to use, by all means, you can kind of weed it out and maybe even introduce what we call a terminal marker, which would replace the clicker. So instead of clicking, you would say some kind of special sound that's something like, yes. And then you would charge it just like the clicker. So every time I say, yes, I'm going to back up and feed my dog. And that word is always paired with food from you. But anyway, we're going to introduce a tactile cue for down. So in the puppy program, we used a lot of food luring. And if our dogs broke position, we were using food a lot of the time to get them back into position when they made a mistake. And so in the partner program, we're kind of weeding that out, and we're replacing, instead of food being the pressure that we pair with the no reward marker when our dog makes a mistake, we're going to introduce other forms of pressure. So in this particular exercise with down, I'm going to use a tactile pressure or leash pressure instead of using food if he pops up out of that down. Now, if I remember, Eddie is usually steady Eddie. So he doesn't have the tendency to break position, but let's see where he's at. Down. There it is, close. Good boy, perfect. So that looks really good. So what I noticed, and this is very common, okay, I have seen him go from a stand to right into a down before. I feel like I have, as I think we did that in class. But a lot of times when we start to use verbal obedience, our dogs kind of just end up cycling through what they know, especially if we're in the habit of training at home in like a patterned type of way. So if we have the tendency to cycle through our dog's known commands, starting from sit, we say sit, paw, down, and roll over. And so those are usually the steps that we go through, and the dogs learn to pick up on that pattern. I've actually had dogs start to offer roll over because they're like, first I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, right? So that's what can happen when we start to ask for verbal obedience. They're kind of just guessing. So the tactile cue for down is going to be another helpful way to kind of break up that pattern. So I'm going to start off with just applying this pressure. It's going to be a slight downwards pressure that I'll apply with my foot. And it's just enough pressure that he feels it. I don't need to put enough to where his neck's doing anything silly. I just need enough to where he feels it. So it's going to go something like this. Perfect. And I'm going to release it momentarily when he sits or does anything in the right direction. Good. I want to be quick to release that pressure if he offers anything other than staring at me. So as soon as he starts to move, I'm going to release the pressure. If he's not all the way in position, I can just reapply the pressure. So in that instance, okay. In that instance where he had sat first, I could have potentially reapplied the pressure. And so in this case, I might keep that pressure on until he goes all the way down. Let's just see. All right, so downwards pressure. So yeah, exactly. He's going right into it. Perfect. So that tactile pressure ends up being what we call a tactile cue for the same behavior. So one behavior, I'm going to actually release him with my clicker here. Good. Nice job. Perfect. Take a little break. So For sits and downs, at least in this program, our dogs will essentially know how to do those behaviors with three different types of cues. They should have a verbal cue, so obviously being able to say the word sit and say the word down and have our dogs respond. They may have visual cues. That's a cue that they can see. That means down. He kind of read the play and just like kind of offered it, but you get the idea. We won't spend too much time going over visual cues until towards the end if we wanted to have like a long distance cue. So a visual cue comes into play or becomes handy if your dog is very far away. So imagine my dog is on the other side of a football field and I've left them in a sit. And now it's time for them to lay down because I did this for, obedience competition. You might not find this a necessary skill in your life, but if my dog's across the field, they're obviously not going to necessarily hear my voice. So if I do something like this, that could be a visual cue to lay down from far away. So my dog can hear a command, see that command, and also we're going to teach a tactile cue, which is what we just did. They can feel the command. So he essentially becomes trilingual for sit and down. And so that's helpful, especially a tactile cue. So a cue that they can feel for both sit and down. That's helpful because if we've got our arms full, or if it also just kind of cuts through the noise. In the hierarchy of those signals, dogs perceive tactile cues best. So if I told him to sit, but I showed him the cue for down, but then I also used a tactile cue, he's going to do whatever the tactile cue tells him to do, most likely. So he's got that tactile cue for down now. Let's just do it one more time. Slight pressure towards the floor. Oops, my foot slipped off the leash. Ideally, when we put pressure, we imagine like an anchor falling. So if he walks around, it's just going to stay here. So we might just have to reset just because he's all tangled up now. Let's reset. Here we go. So I'm going to put pressure on right here, and ideally that pressure goes on and stays on right in that spot. I'm going to release it there where he started to move. Good boy. And the other part is if he makes a mistake, if he were to pop up out of that down, ideally I would apply that pressure with the no reward marker until he became correct again, rather than using food to get him back down. Good. Perfect. All right, and just to kind of end this, we're going to also do the tactile cue for SIT. And since we've just did a bunch of DOWN, this one actually might be a little bit tricky. So a slight upwards pressure instead of a slight downwards pressure is going to be our tactile cue. And I'm going to release it there. Good. Okay. And I want to kind of release him before he offers the DOWN. Or I could have fed him in position too. So slight upwards pressure. Good. Release the pressure as soon as his bum starts to hit the floor. Good boy. And just for kicks, we'll add in the tactile cue. Perfect. Good boy. So he's doing really great with that. He picked that right up. So you can practice that for homework and just make sure that you are still using your implied stays and your marker system, and making sure that you break up any patterns that he might have learned. If you're cycling through all his behaviors, randomly ask him for a down from a standing position. You could even try what we call puppy push-ups, which would also involve you teaching him stand. Good. So you might incorporate that. So puppy push-ups would be cycling through stand, down, sit, down, stand, and you just kind of make it variable. He's like, whoa. So that would be good for him too. Although with him in particular, where he's growing, I wouldn't necessarily do puppy push-ups very rapid fire, because he might be a little bit, it could potentially cause him pain to be moving those joints so rapidly. So That looks really good. He's doing an awesome job. Good job, Edison.